Will RJ Harvey finally prove the Denver Broncos right on Sunday when they face the LA Chargers? Could an interesting schedule quirk within the NFL make a huge push in deciding the winner of the AFC West? And are the Colorado Avalanche in danger of allowing history to repeat itself? All things to come on today's rundown, but we have to begin, as we have often done, with a shout out to our friends at Denver Regenerative Medicine. Guys, if weight loss has been a struggle for you, it's time for something real. At Denver Regenerative Medicine, they use full-strength GLP-1 medications with doctor oversight. You can start today with a free consultation and get real results for under $300 a month. Book now at denverregen.com. The Denver Broncos are headed to LA to face the Chargers this weekend in what could shape up to be a very revealing game for a multitude of different reasons. One is on the more micro level and the other a little bit more macro perspective. So let's start at the micro level and take a look at the fact that two rookie running backs will be squaring off against their opposing teams. And it'll be a little bit of a what-if, bizarro world situation for the Denver Broncos, who had the opportunity to draft the Chargers starting running back, Omarion Hampton, in the first round and elected not to by not stepping over the crystal that was Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas, and drafting Omarion Hampton when they had a clear need at the running back position. They instead elect to, in the second round, not move up to get the likes of a Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson, the two-star running backs out of Ohio State, and instead trade back a couple of times with minor moves and select UCF running back RJ Harvey. That move was a little bit, I don't want to say controversial, but it was certainly eyebrow-raising and something that was met with some skepticism at the time because of how inept the Broncos running back room, which was headed by now Cowboys running back Javonte Williams, and then supplemented by Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime, the latter of which is no longer on the team. And now we have Tyler Bidet serving in that role along with RJ Harvey and the incumbent, the new starter, J.K. Dobbins. So there was a lot of people, myself actually included, who on this exact show on draft night when we were live from the Sportsbook Bar and Grill was surprised by the choice to draft Jahdae Barron. That was not something that was on a lot of people's radars overall, locally or nationally, in terms of projecting who the Broncos would pick. And Omarion Hampton was firmly in those projections. But I will say this. I understand that it's a limited sample size, just a couple of weeks into the season in order to make broader projections or judgments on a specific player or even on a specific team. But with what we've seen thus far through 2 weeks, I truly don't believe that the Denver Broncos should be feeling or will experience after Sunday's game any kind of buyer's remorse or regret about not drafting Omarion Hampton and quote-unquote settling for RJ Harvey out of UCF. And part of that comes from just looking and watching the games and seeing what each running back's been able to do within their system. It's pretty comparable, which I think says more about RJ Harvey than it does about Omarion Hampton. When you look at their statistics for the 2025 season thus far, you've got a almost more than double increase in the amount of attempts for Omarion Hampton with the Chargers over RJ Harvey here with the Broncos behind J.K. Dobbins. And yet RJ Harvey has a slight uptick in yards and more than double the amount of yards per carry. Now, some of you may look at that and say, well, if you take away RJ Harvey's 50-yard run, which skews some of those numbers, it's not that impressive. And while there is some truth to the fact that a big chunk of that yards per carry total coming from a large run on a small number of carries and the yardage total, there is inherent logic in that. Let me say this. He busted a 50-yard run. And we had a situation where last year's running back room, no Broncos running back had a carry for longer than 21 yards over the course of an entire season. Zach Bye was pounding that table week after week after week when you're talking about north of 400 total carries and not one explosive run or play to reach more than 21 yards, of course, the entire season. RJ Harvey did it in the first game for the Denver Broncos. And I do think that while you can say maybe that should take away from it, I think it's tough to do that considering no Bronco running back last year did it. His running mate in the backfield, J.K. Dobbins, eats into the majority of the carries to allow him to get into a rhythm and maybe pop a big one the way that he did. And Omarion Hampton has had more than double the opportunities and failed to do so on a team that has been built around, identity-wise, under Jim Harbaugh, running the football, being nasty up front, and playing smash-mouth, aggressive, offensive football. RJ Harvey was not the running back that many people in Broncos country thought they were going to have coming into the NFL draft this past April. But the running backs that went off the board before them, including, by the way, fellow AFC West running back Ashton Jeanty, have not, in my opinion, so overly convincingly blown away the field through, I understand, just 2 weeks of NFL football that would make me say the Broncos made a mistake by not either moving up in the draft or selecting Omarion Hampton when they had him on the board available at 20th overall. And that RJ Harvey, even fighting for carries, of which he may deserve more of, behind J.K. Dobbins, who thus far has been running well enough, is not going to prove the Broncos wrong. And then the longer the season goes on, if this trend continues, I think RJ Harvey's role is going to increase, and it will be much harder to argue that another rookie runner from this class that was available when the Broncos were on the board or selected between their first-round pick and their second-round pick would be doing a better job right now. I do think, however, that this game is going to have a significant impact on the race for the AFC West divisional title, and it comes because of a unique scheduling quirk that I can't remember if I've ever seen before, at least certainly not in recent memory, where the Los Angeles Chargers, who were a wild card team last year, just like the Denver Broncos, have their first 3 games of the 2025 schedule against consecutive divisional opponents. They played the Chiefs on Friday night in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and were able to come away with the international win. Last weekend, they played the Raiders and came away with a win there in convincing fashion. And now they play the Broncos this upcoming Sunday at 2 o'clock. And sitting at 2-0 with an opportunity to go 3-0 on the season, but more importantly, 3-0 in the division, this game has a significant impact, in my opinion, on who is going to put themselves in pole position and have the best chance to win the AFC West. Something that I think both the Broncos and the Chargers would like to figure themselves contenders to be, especially when you see the slowest start we've ever seen from the Kansas City Chiefs in the Patrick Mahomes era. And if the Broncos are able to beat the Chargers, it puts them in the short term, pole position and a temporary advantage in that category with a significant number of divisional games left to play. But more importantly, if the Broncos are unable to take care of business against the Chargers and LA gets to sit at 3-0 on the season and 3-0 in the division, guaranteeing themselves at minimum a split and potential tiebreakers over the remainder of their AFC West division, that is going to make the wild card race with 2 teams in the Broncos and the Chargers who factor squarely into that equation when postseason rolls around. It's going to put the Chargers with a significant advantage in that category. So at just week 3 of the NFL season, there are already some potentially significant long-term ramifications resting on Sunday's outcome. And I think that the pressure is much more squarely placed on the Broncos to come away with the win here than it is the Chargers because of what they've been able to do in the first couple of weeks of the season. There's a lot of football left to be played, and things can even out to a certain degree over the course of the next 15 or 16 games in the NFL. But this game on Sunday is massively important. One, for a Broncos team that needs to regain its footing and prove that last year's 10-7 season was not an aberration and was more of a sign of things to come. And the slow start that they've experienced offensively, the inability to find any rhythm and continuity throughout training camp and the preseason on offense, and frankly, the defense's exposure, especially last weekend against Indianapolis, that may suggest that there's more of a return, a regression to the mean, or a coming back to earth overall for an exceptional defense and perhaps maybe an exposure of an offense that was floated a little bit or elevated by lesser competition and masked underneath a poor record against teams above 500 and teams with a winning record and poor scores in one-score games. The Broncos have more to prove in that regard, that they are who they are, than the Chargers do, who have a little bit more of an established track record. And if the Broncos are unable to do so, they cede a significant advantage to LA in what figures to be a wild card race that both of those two teams are squarely in the mix. Shifting gears to the Colorado Avalanche, who were a significant portion of our conversation and topic of note yesterday, with our friend of the show, Will Peterson, who was out at Avalanche Media Day at Ball Arena as the Avalanche and their training camp and 2025 campaign get ready to kick off in very short order. There was one topic of conversation that came up yesterday that I wanted to save for today for a little bit more of an expanded conversation because I think it is warranted. And Will gave us such great insight about talking to Nathan McKinnon, Gabriel Landeskog, and Jared Bednar, in an intimate fashion about the length of time between the two, the Stanley Cup appearance and win that they had in 2021, 2022, and where they sit now with the rigmarole and the revolving door of transactions that Chris McFarland, who was wheeling and dealing up till January's trade deadline this past season, to revamp and retool the roster, including slicing off a massive franchise cornerstone in Mikko Rantanen to try to make that happen. And ultimately, Mikko Rantanen ends up putting the final nail in the Avalanche coffin in the first round of the postseason against the Dallas Stars, against his former team. But there is a little bit of deja vu that's happening over at Ball Arena that I think needs to be firmly on everyone's radar, and I would think is on the radar for Chris McFarland, Joe Sakic and company within the organization. And it centers around the cornerstone piece of the Mikko Rantanen trade that came back to Colorado from the Carolina Hurricanes, and that is Marty Necas. Necas was supposed to be the figure that slides in on the top line alongside Nathan McKinnon and helps replicate from a production standpoint the perennial 100-point scoring that Mikko Rantanen was able to do at certainly less than the market value that Mikko was commanding at that time, which was north of $12 million and possibly up to $14 million per year on an average annual value basis. That didn't quite materialize itself outside of a brief burst at the start of the season for Marty Necas with the Avalanche. But it seemed to kind of slow down and fizzle out as the postseason approached. And in the postseason, where he was matched up against a much more physical and large Dallas Stars defensive front, it proved itself to be less than expected in that regard. But the deja vu comes from the fact that when you look at the Mikko Rantanen situation and what Chris McFarland was faced with, Mikko was going into the final year of a deal where he was getting paid right around $9 to $10 million per year and was going to command significantly more than that with an upcoming contract extension. And given that the Avalanche have had a history of running very top-heavy and committing so much money for Nathan McKinnon, to Cale Makar, and Valeri Nichushkin, who they chose in the Nazem Kadri post-Stanley Cup decisions to let Kadri walk and back their guy in Valeri Nichushkin, who has proven to be a little bit of a lightning rod, and the difference in success when Val is on the ice and performing well versus when he's off the ice, as he has been unfortunately too long since they won the Stanley Cup, is significant. But with the top-heavy nature that the Colorado Avalanche have operated with their especially top line, it has proven difficult to do that and manage having two of the four or five best players in hockey on the Avalanche's roster, while also balancing and spreading money around to provide quality depth, especially as you get below that second line, particularly with the second line center. So Chris McFarland, with Mikko Rantanen in the last year of a deal, has to then make the decision to either re-sign Mikko at a rate that's going to further balloon the top-heavy nature of the Avalanche's payroll and stretch their cap situation even further from a depth perspective, or move Mikko, bring in a handful of players, which turned out to be Marty Necas and Jack Drury, with some draft equity as well, and try to get, I don't know, 80%, 70, 80% of that production for 70, 80% of the price and spread the rest of that savings around to build deeper depth scoring. That came in the form of Brock Nelson and Charlie Coyle and Ryan Lindgren, and mixing all of these pieces after revamping the goalie room with the Woodshed, Mackenzie Blackwood, and Scott Wedgwood. And it just felt like it was a lot of moving parts, and I think it manifested itself in the postseason. Well, now, Marty Necas, the cornerstone of that piece, is heading into the final year of a contract where he's due $6.5 million per year and is probably going to command at least $9, possibly slightly north of $10 million per year on the open market in terms of average annual value. And Chris McFarland, unfortunately, has to make the exact same decision that he was forced to make with Mikko Rantanen and decide, do you keep Marty Necas and sign him to an extension and maybe pay him a little bit more than what his production was pacing during his limited sample size with Colorado last year? Or do you trade him again and hope that you can do what you tried to do in the Mikko Rantanen trade, perhaps with a little bit more success, or at a minimum, try to break even for less money? And that's a little bit of a slippery proposition, and certainly not one that you would think that McFarland, Sakic, and company would want to be faced with after making such a difficult decision to move on from a franchise cornerstone player. And in my opinion, the answer should be simple. The Colorado Avalanche need to get a deal done with Marty Necas and avoid tripping over the same wire, allowing history to repeat itself and completing the deja vu cycle where they let exactly what happened during the Mikko Rantanen trade happen to Marty Necas and then have to go out and find the next Marty Necas type figure and probably experience the law of diminishing returns the same way that it did with Mikko. Marty Necas, in that limited sample size, which could change in the upcoming season, was unable to replicate the lofty production from a points perspective, especially in the goal-scoring department, of a Mikko Rantanen. And that isn't, in hindsight, probably all that surprising, as hopeful as it may have seemed when the trade happened. But they were able to spread the money around from a depth perspective. They lock down Brock Nelson. They bring in veteran defenseman Brent Burns and Victor Olofsson. They have their goaltending situation much more stable and figured out. Jack Drury still factors in to be at least a fourth-line center, if not third-line center to start the season. And you feel better about the pieces that you have outside of the loss of Mikko Rantanen. So you can allow, in my opinion, Marty Necas to walk out the door. And if that means you got to pay him $9.5 to maybe just north of $10 million per year and spread it out, then I think that's what you have to do. Because if you let him walk and you basically create a cycle that says you let Mikko Rantanen go for nothing because the piece that you moved is no longer with the organization, regardless of the depth pieces that have maintained where that money helped spread around, that's a bad look for the organization. And I think it's a bad step backward for an Avalanche team that, as they acknowledged to our own Will Peterson on Media Day, is desperate with a sense of urgency and a hunger to return to the Stanley Cup final and get a second cup brought back to, with this core, the city of Denver and the state of Colorado. So I urge Chris McFarland, Joe Sakic and company to do so. And on the subject of the contract negotiation, we heard from the man, Marty Necas himself, who was asked at Media Day where things stand. Take a listen.
There was a lot of things happening, and being traded during the year wasn't easy, but I felt like it was a great opportunity here, and now being here, starting with the camp and kind of getting to know the guys way more is great, and I'm excited for the season.
Eric? How would you describe your experience in Colorado, in the last 7-8 months since the trade, and is signing a new contract a priority that you want to take care of before opening night, or is that something that could drag?
Yeah, I think it was great, especially the way we play here. I think it kind of fits my game, and it was definitely a shock when I got traded, but then about contract, we're talking. We'll see what's going to happen. Can't really tell you. I don't even know. So will be interesting, and it's more about my agent.
You can hear it in his voice there. That is a player who was shocked by the trade, as many were around the NHL, where Frank Saravalli noted and respected NHL insider, and I think it's a fair judgment of the situation, called the Mikko Rantanen trade one of the biggest, if not the biggest, moves in the last couple of decades in the entire NHL, seismically shaking up the Western Conference and the Stanley Cup contention ability for multiple franchises, especially two within the same division. And equally shocking probably was Marty Necas, who was experiencing a productive and prolific season on a cup contending team in the East in Carolina, to see him then completely shifted across the country to a new lineup with new line mates and a new team, and have to mix in all of the other moving parts that had to fall into place last year because of the moves by Chris MacFarland, many of which were certainly well-intentioned and some of which may continue to blossom in ways that we maybe weren't sure about last season. But a lot of that dust has settled now. You can hear it in Necas' voice. A lot of the whispers and the rumors, which, by the way, were coming from reputable sources as well, about Necas perhaps not being thrilled or happy with his status and his time here in Colorado, and maybe looking to go out onto the open market. That seems to have quelled, at least for now. And I think that's a good thing, because if what was unable to take place in the back half of the 2024 season, with this coalescing and this coming together of so many moving parts around a very talented nucleus and core that the Colorado Avalanche possess, if that is able to transition itself and transform itself in this offseason and the beginning of this season, and we see them firing on all cylinders, and we see that synergy start to take place, this Colorado Avalanche team is going to be a problem for the rest of the league. And that may sound similar to how we've talked about the Avalanche in basically every year since they won the Cup. And while it's fallen short a handful of times, as Jared Bednar pointed out on Media Day to our own Will Peterson, there's only been two. There's only been two teams that have won the Stanley Cup in the NHL since the Colorado Avalanche won it. That's because it's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult mountaintop to summit even once, let alone continue to put yourself in a position to do that year after year. But I think that this season, evidenced by the words of Gabe Landeskog, who is lauding and happy about the depth, and also appears to be ready in the eyes of his head coach and himself, ready for a full workload. If that depth that was brought in as a result of the moves by GM Chris MacFarland, including Marty Necas, is fully assimilated into the organization and the chemistry and connectivity is there, you can't risk breaking that up by moving Necas again. They need to lock down Marty Necas to a long-term contract the way they did with Brock Nelson, to be their second-line center, who will be the latest in a long iteration of players who have tried to replicate the impact and the production of Nazem Kadri, who helped the Avalanche win their third Stanley Cup. And if the Avs are really going to have a legitimate shot at a fourth, they need everybody locked down and moving in the same direction. Will there be roster tinkering that happens during the season? Of course. Players and coaches yesterday both alluded to that. But Marty Necas should not be a piece that we are wondering about in November and December and January as to whether or not he is going to be on this Avalanche roster come playoffs and coming 2026 and beyond. And that is why I think they can, should, and will get a deal done with Necas in hopefully the very near future. There is going to be a lot to keep tabs on with the Avalanche as their training camp and season gets ready to go here. The Nuggets are right around the corner, as well as both teams will get going later in the next month or so. And then the Broncos, as I stated earlier, with their, I will say, significant game here against the Chargers, albeit 3 weeks into a season, but there's only 17 weeks, 18 technically, but 17 games in an NFL season to make an impact. And even though we're only less than a month into this season, this week 3 game against the Chargers is going to have a massive impact on the AFC West trajectory and the playoff potential and probability for a Broncos squad that, especially offensively, has gotten off to a little different start than many of us thought it would. But I don't think, to put a bow on everything we've talked about today, that there will be a lot of questions and pitchforks and lanterns about not drafting Omarion Hampton and choosing RJ Harvey while being able to draft a guy like Jahdae Barron as well. Because I think RJ Harvey, in less than half the amount of carries and a much more limited sample size, has proven just as much explosive capability and has the opportunity to on-ramp in a more progressive and productive way, sharing carries for now with J.K. Dobbins, which could change at any week or any moment within a game, given health concerns, game script, etc. I think RJ Harvey, his runway in future looks just as bright as Omari and Hampton's would in that same situation. Stay locked into Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan for all of the Broncos and Denver Sports, Colorado sports related content, from CU to CSU to Colorado School of Mines, our own Josh Dover running play-by-play for the Ore Diggers, and professionally with the Broncos, the Avalanche, the Nuggets, the Rockies, and really any other sports content that you can imagine. We have it for you at Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. If you haven't, type in www.denversports.com into your URL bar and just humor me and take a peek at the unbelievable and vast vault of content that is there for you from a written perspective, from guys like Will Peterson, Jake Shapiro, Trent Finnegan, Andrew Mason, our senior Broncos writer, James Marilat, yes, that James Marilat, and Cecil Lammy, and so many others. And then go ahead and click that watch tab at denversports.com and open up a library of video content that I promise you, even on your lightest workload day, you don't have enough time to consume all of the opinions, entertainment, and analysis that we have here for you for all sports ranging across the entire state of Colorado. And then like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep tabs on guys like me chirping in the comments and tell me why I'm an idiot or why you maybe agree with a handful of things that I've said here today, and catch Denver Sports Daily and Orange and Blue Today and Mile High Hoops and Hockey and so many other live digital shows that are recorded daily and weekly and monthly all season long here for you under the umbrella that is Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll catch you tomorrow for the next rundown.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work. I only improve this crazy body.